the 30th of June, 2022. Dandenong, Victoria, 145 workers walk out the gate of the Iveco truck plant for the last time. The last International ACCO is finished. Michael May, the Mercedes-trained Iveco managing director, calls the closure a natural progression. He calls it a turning point. He says Iveco could have continued and had to invest tens of millions in that facility or align with Europe. He aligned with Europe. 25 kilometres away on Canterbury Road, Bayswater, Kenworth is signing on 120 new manufacturing workers in the same year. The American-owned plant that built its first Australian truck, chassis number 400,008, the Grey Ghost, on the 2nd of March 1971, has outlasted every American and British rival: Ford Louisville, White Motor, Leyland Australia, Foden, International, 5 dead competitors: the Melbourne Rebel, Humiliated Detroit, Dearborn, Lancashire, Turin. Chapter 1. The Seattle Landlords, January 1923, Seattle, Washington. Two men, named Harry W. Kent and Edgar K. Worthington, incorporate a company that will be named by combining their surnames. Ken plus Worth, Kenworth. The hardship trigger arrives in 1917. Worthington and Captain Frederick S. Keene, both marine finance executives in the Pacific Northwest. Timber and shipping trade are the landlords of a small bankrupt Portland truck manufacturer called Gerlinger Motor Car Works. The Gerlinger brothers, George T. Gerlinger and Louis Gerlinger Jr., founded the company in 1912 to build heavy-duty trucks for Pacific Northwest loggers. The Gerlinger four-cylinder design was sound. The Gerlinger management was not. By 1917, the company is insolvent. Worthington and Keene, holding the lease on the Gerlinger factory, take the company through foreclosure. They rename it Gersick Manufacturing for the 6-cylinder Continental engine the company has switched to. Kenworth was born from a debt default. In 1923, Kent buys into the Gersicks partnership. The Gersicks name is dropped. The new company is named Kenworth for Kent and Worthington. 78 gasoline-powered trucks roll off the production line in year one. The first truck is delivered in March 1923, 2 months after incorporation. The Pacific Northwest logging trade wants a tougher truck than the 4-cylinder Rios and Studebakers offer. Kenworth becomes the logger's truck. Worthington retires in 1929. Kent becomes president. Kent dies in 1937. Worthington dies later that year. Both founders dead 14 years after the company they named was incorporated. The trucks they built outlast them by a century. Diesel becomes standard equipment in 1933. Kenworth is the first American truck manufacturer to offer diesel as standard. Diesel cost 1/3 the price of gasoline in 1933. The decision that defined the next century. Every Cummins-powered W900 SAR rolling off Bayswater in 2026 traces back to the 1933 Kenworth diesel adoption decision. If you watched our Toowoomba Foundry film, you know the British migrant George Washington Griffiths, who built a Queensland windmill empire by acquiring a local foundry in 1871. Kenworth was born the same way. Two marine finance landlords inherited a bankrupt truck maker through a foreclosure. Both companies founded on debt acquisition. Both companies named after their founders. One died in 2012, Bunnings Car Park. One is still building in 2026, 3,347 Australian Kenworths delivered last year. 1945. Paul Pigott purchases Kenworth for Pacific Car and Foundry for an undisclosed sum. Pacific Car had been founded by William Pigott in 1905 in Seattle, with $10,000 of capital. By 1945, the company is the dominant Pacific Northwest steel fabrication conglomerate. In 1946, it moves the Kenworth operation into the former Fisher Body plant near Boeing Field. The wartime steel foundry is now the parent company of the Bayswater plant in 2026, renamed PACCAR in 1972. Chapter 2. The Sherman Tanks and the Diamond T. December 1941. Pearl Harbor. Seattle is declared a critical labour area. The American war machine commandeers Pacific Northwest industry within weeks of the Pearl Harbor attack. The Kenworth M1 wrecker. Kenworth Seattle wins the contract to build the M1 6x6 heavy recovery truck for the United States Army. The M1 is designed to recover damaged tanks and disabled trucks from the battlefield. Initial order, 430 units, then 1,500 more by the end of 1941. The order forces Kenworth to switch from individual stall building to a moving production line, the first moving line in the company's history. Kenworth's Darrell Simon on the M1 line verbatim, the early forerunner of the production system our plants use today. The assembly line that builds the trucks at Bayswater in 2026 was invented by an Army contract during the Pacific War. A predominantly female workforce at Kenworth Seattle also builds B-17 Flying Fortress and B-29 Super Fortress subassemblies for Boeing. Production is partly relocated inland to the Yakima Fairgrounds to spread the bombing risk. Kenworth women build the wings and tail sections of the bombers that flew over Berlin and Tokyo. The wartime workforce returns to civilian life in 1945, but the moving production line stays. Pacific Car and Foundry, the Kenworth parent, builds Sherman M4A1 tanks from spring 1942, plus the T-28 Super Heavy Tank, the 95-ton experimental American heavy tank designed to assault the Siegfried Line, plus the M25 tank transporter, steel tugboats, and dry docks for the Pacific Fleet. Pacific Car cast nearly all the tank parts in its own Seattle foundry. In 1942, it shipped Sherman tank hulls to Detroit for final assembly. The foundry that cast the Shermans is the foundry that owns Bayswater today. Meanwhile, in Central Australia, the road train is being invented. Kurt Johansson, bush mechanic, born in the Northern Territory, the son of a Lutheran missionary, buys a US Army surplus Diamond T M20 tank transporter. He names it Bertha. It is powered by a Hercules DXFE diesel engine with 185 horsepower. To the Diamond T he attaches trailers built from 23 surplus Army gun trailers, fitted with self-tracking turntables of his own design. Total length is 54 metres. Total payload is 100 head of cattle. It is the first modern Australian road train, born from American Lend-Lease surplus. Johansson runs Bertha across the Northern Territory, carrying cattle from the Barkly tableland to the Adelaide River railhead. It is the first commercial road train operation. Without Bertha, the post-war Australian heavy haulage industry would not exist. Kurt Johansson dies on the 23rd of January 2002, aged 87. Bertha is restored and displayed at the National Road Transport Hall of Fame in Alice Springs, 20 metres away from where the first Australian-built Kenworth will eventually sit. If you watched our Tandy Electronics film, you know AWA Ashfield made the radar valves that warned the Pacific Fleet of Japanese carriers in 1942. The factories that fought the Pacific War became the spine of post-war Australian industry. Pacific Car and Foundry cast the Sherman tanks that fought against Tokyo. Kenworth Seattle built the wreckers that recovered them. 21 years later, those trucks would arrive in Sydney Harbour. Chapter 3. November 1961. Melbourne, Victoria. A Kenworth executive flies into Melbourne. His name is John Holmstrom, Vice President and Chief Engineer of Kenworth Truck Company in Seattle. He has been sent to evaluate whether the Australian market is worth the investment. The man who meets him at the airport is Ed Cameron, Sydney-produced truckie, born around 1923. Cameron drives Holmstrom up the Hume Highway towards Sydney. The Hume Highway in 1961 is a two-lane sealed road with steep grades north of Albury that no American truck has been engineered for. Holmstrom watches the grades climb. He climbs out of the cab at the top. His verbatim words to Cameron, recorded in historic vehicles, were couldn't believe the steep grades. That sentence killed the American assumption that the Pacific Northwest logging design would work in Australia. The grades killed the assumption. The W900 SAR will be born from this drive. 14 years later, the W800 SAR will roll off Bayswater with engineering designed to climb those grades. Cameron and his partner George Blomfield, born 1905, Sydney truckie, son of a carter, had first travelled to the United States in 1955, seeking a tougher truck than anything sold by International or Leyland in Australia. They had spent 6 years scouting American manufacturers: Mack, Peterbilt, White, International, Kenworth. Cameron chose Kenworth because of the Cummins diesel partnership and the bonneted long-nose design. In October 1962, 7 hand-built S-model Kenworths arrived in Sydney by ship, 4 for Cameron, 3 for Blomfield. These were the first Kenworths fitted with Detroit diesel engines anywhere in the world. Cameron founded Australian Kenworth Truck Sales Proprietary Limited, Sydney-based. He sold more than 100 units before Pacific Car and Foundry bought the distribution rights from him in 1967 for an undisclosed sum. He remained a PACCAR director into the 1970s. Ed Cameron died in 2016, aged 93. George Blomfield died in 1995. If you watched our Holden film, you know Sir Edward Holden surrendered the family carriage business to General Motors in 1931. Cameron and Blomfield did the inverse. 2 Australian truckies imported an American truck and built a dynasty that did not surrender. The American parent eventually bought them out, but the Bayswater plant was a Cameron-Blomfield idea before it was a PACCAR investment. The Australian truck market chose its own American parent. The American parent kept its end of the bargain. 7 trucks arrived in Sydney Harbour in October 1962. 63 years later, 3,347 Kenworths were sold in Australia in a single year, the market leader since 2001. Read that again. Chapter 4. The Grey Ghost, the 2nd of March 1971, 64 Canterbury Road, Bayswater, Victoria. The first all-Australian Kenworth rolls off the production line. Its name is the Grey Ghost, a cab-over K1225CR, chassis number 400,008. Built for Quick-Air Express Freight, the Sydney-based express courier that ran capital to capital at high speed. V8-powered Detroit diesel, capable of 100 miles per hour, no sleeping quarters, no logbooks, renowned for high-speed tailgating between Sydney and Melbourne overnight. The first Australian-built Kenworth was an outlaw truck. The first driver was Terry Baker, a 48-year truck driver, 34 of them as an owner-operator, later inducted into the Wall of Fame at the National Road Transport Hall of Fame. He drove the Grey Ghost on its maiden voyage. 1 man, 1 truck, $1 million of plant investment behind him. The Bayswater plant opened in 1970, built for approximately $1 million, 56,000 square feet of factory and office. At the time of the first Grey Ghost, approximately 100 people worked at Bayswater, 1 truck per day. Annual production capacity at opening was 250 trucks. The plant expansion runs through 5 decades. In 1978, the plant doubled in size, adding 300 more jobs. In 1993, it became the first PACCAR plant globally to achieve ISO 9001 accreditation. In 1996, the 25th anniversary marked the 15,000th Kenworth. From 2020 to 2021, a $40 to $50 million site expansion took place, plus 120 new factory jobs recruited in the same financial year. The International ACCO closed in Dandenong. The production milestones tell the dynasty. In 2013, the 50,000th Kenworth, a K200, was delivered to Peter Rodney of Rodney's Transport Service, who runs 104 Kenworth prime movers. In 2017, the 60,000th Kenworth rolled off. In March 2021, the 70,000th Kenworth was delivered to Brown and Hurley dealership, coinciding with the 50th anniversary of the Bayswater plant. In October 2023, the 80,000th Kenworth, a T6110 SAR, was delivered to Booth Transport, a fourth-generation Australian-owned trucking family with 25 years of continuous Kenworth purchases. Today, in 2026, 1,315 employees work at Bayswater. The plant produces 21 trucks per day at peak. From 100 workers to 1,300, from 1 truck per day to 21. Every other heavy truck plant in Australia closed in those 5 decades. Footscray Leyland, 1982. Tonsley Chrysler, 1981. Geelong Ford, 2016. Elizabeth Holden, 2017. Dandenong International, 2022. Bayswater stood through every closure. The Grey Ghost itself was tracked down in Sydney decades later. Restored at Bayswater for approximately $125,000. Original 1971 price, £12,000 sterling. The restoration cost more than 10 times the original purchase price. The Grey Ghost now sits at the National Road Transport Hall of Fame, Alice Springs, 20 metres from Kurt Johansson's Bertha. The original murder weapon and the inspiration that made it possible, side by side. Chapter 5. The W900 SR and the Engineer. Who drove the Hume? July 1975. Bayswater, Victoria. The W900 SR rolls off the production line. The first Kenworth model designed, engineered and built in Australia specifically for Australian operating requirements. The acronym is technical. SAR originally stood for Short Bonnet A Series Cab Right-Hand Drive. It was later localised in trade press to Short Australian Right-Hand Drive. Both meanings honour the same fact. This was the truck that adapted. The engineering specifications matter. Set forward front axle, steep sloping bonnet, high-set cab housing a larger radiator for superior cooling of high horsepower, Cummins and Detroit diesel engines in Australian summers. Undercab battery and toolbox storage. Lighter than the W900AR and lighter than the K100 cabover. Production 1975 to 1987. The W900 SAR is also exported to New Zealand, Japan, Thailand, Papua New Guinea and Zambia within 2 years of the Bayswater plant opening. The W900 SAR was the answer to John Holmstrom's question on the Hume Highway. High horsepower Cummins engines could be cooled in 40-degree Australian summers without derating. The set-forward front axle improved articulation around tight roadhouse turn-ins. Every detail was tuned for Australia. The original designer of the W900 SAR is unnamed in all public Kenworth and trade press sources. The Bayswater engineers who built it are credited generically. The W900 SAR is a collective work. No single name is attached to the most important Kenworth ever made in Australia. That is the honest record. What is documented is the engineer who lived the era. Phil Webb joined PACCAR Bayswater in late 1975, the same year as the W900 SAR. Mechanical engineering degree. Moved between Bayswater and the Sydney St Peters dealership. Returned to Bayswater. Tasked with overseeing the Australian specification development of the L700 and C500 heavy haulage models. The C500 evolved under Webb's engineering oversight into the big bore powered truck that hauls in Australian mining today. Phil Webb on the Bayswater pace, verbatim to Trailer Magazine and Smedley's. When I started, we were building 3 trucks per week, comprising the K100 series cabover, along with W900R, W900SR and W900S2R conventional models. Some few years later, we were turning out 2 to 3 trucks a day. 3 trucks per week in 1975, 21 per day in 2021. Phil Webb retired in 2019 after 44 years. The engineer who lived from the first W900 SAR to the K200 retired the year before the $50 million. Bayswater expansion broke ground. The W900 SR was not won in Bayswater. It was won in depots and workshops across the country, customer by customer. Take Graham Nicholson, Australian truckie, 35 years on the road, 30 of them as an owner-operator. Verbatim from his Kenworth testimonial, the first truck I owned was a Ford LTS Louisville with a 365 Cummins in it. It came with a bit of work and we just built from that. Nicholson's fleet today runs entirely on Kenworths. 600 horsepower Cummins B-doubles, 60-tonne payloads, 8 million kilometres on the road across his career. He replaces every truck at 1 million kilometres or 5 years. His latest, Kenworth number 30 in the fleet, a K200, joined recently. The Ford Louisville drivers became Kenworth drivers. The American parent in Dearborn walked away. The Australian-built Kenworth stayed in the depot. Or take Chris Billy Keane, owner-operator from Melton, Victoria. A blue Kenworth K100, same truck for 20 years. Over 3 million kilometres on one prime mover, single replacement motor along the way. The truck appeared in the 2005 Hollywood film Ghost Rider with Nicolas Cage. 3 million kilometres on one truck is not a marketing claim. It is a Melton workshop log. The engineering verdict on the W900 SAR was delivered 20 years and 3 million kilometres later in a Melton workshop. If you watched our Bedford film, you know GM Australia starved Bedford trucks of investment, while British Leyland collapsed under merger debt. The W800 ASAR was the engineering opposite. Bedford received Vauxhall's surplus. Bayswater designed its own. Chapter 6. The First Body. Ford Louisville. 1996. 1996. Dearborn, Michigan. Ford Motor Company executives make a corporate decision that will end the Ford heavy truck brand in Australia. The Ford Louisville L-Series had been assembled in Australia since 1975, built at Ford's Melbourne and Brisbane facilities. 15,171 units rolled off Australian assembly lines across 23 years. The Louisville competed directly with Kenworth's W900 SER in the bonneted long-haul category. Ford had the largest dealer network of any heavy truck brand in Australia. Ford had everything except a parent that believed in heavy trucks. Ford USA in 1996 announces it is abandoning nearly all its heavy truck business globally. The Australian heavy-duty range is sold to Freightliner and Daimler. Production is rebadged as Sterling and discontinued by 2009. The Ford heavy truck brand is gone from Australia by 1998. The name villain was not in Australia. The decision was made in Dearborn by Ford USA executives who concluded the heavy truck business was not strategic. The Australian operation was profitable. The Australian operation was killed anyway. The American parent abandoned its own Australian trucks. In the same era, PACCAR Seattle was expanding Bayswater. Ford Australia continued building cars. Ford Australia announces the end of car manufacturing in May 2013. The last Falcon rolls off the production line on the 7th of October 2016. Geelong engine plant closed. Broadmeadows shut. Approximately 1,200 manufacturing jobs gone. Ford left Australia twice. Heavy trucks 1996. Cars 2016. 2 chances to stay. Walked away both times. If you watched our Holden film, You know GM made the same call in 2017, the last Commodore rolling off Elizabeth on the 20th of October 2017. Approximately 2,900 jobs gone. The American automotive parents abandoned Australia. The American truck parent at PACCAR Seattle did the opposite. Same country, opposite decision. Meanwhile in Melton, Graham's Ford LTS Louisville became Graham's K200. Chapter 7. The British Bodies. Leyland, Albion, AEC, Foden, Atkinson. The 1968 British Leyland Motor Corporation merger. Leyland Motors merges with British Motor Holdings to form the BLMC. The merger is meant to consolidate the British motor industry against German and Japanese competition. The merger fails almost immediately. Strikes, quality collapse, union militancy, model line overlap. December 1974, British Leyland collapses into a United Kingdom government bailout. The British truck industry has just lost its corporate spine. Leyland Australia. Established Australian branch 1919, older than Kenworth itself. Footscray, Melbourne truck factory, opened 1958. The truck and bus division at Footscray built Leyland, Albion, Scammell, AEC and Thornycroft trucks across 3 decades. At its peak, Leyland Australia employed more than 2,000 people. March 1982, Jaguar Rover Australia absorbs Leyland Australia's assets. Leyland Australia ceases trading. 5 British truck brands die in a single corporate decision. Albion, Glasgow built, founded 1899, assembled in Australia from the 1920s, gone in 1982, AEC. Associated Equipment Company, London built, Southall plant, gone in 1982, Scammell. Thornycroft, all extinguished by the same closure. Atkinson, Preston, Lancashire. Heavy haulage specialist, acquired by Seddon Atkinson in 1970. The Cummins-powered Atkinson Borderer that had hauled Australian road trains is replaced by Kenworth W900 SR. Atkinson Australia is gone by the late 1980s. Foden, Sandbachgun, Bachmann-Tahambach, Cheshire. Bought by PACCAR in 1980 as a low-cost European entry-level brand. Production ceased 2006. From 2000 onwards, Foden was just a rebadged DAF. The same PACCAR that owned Kenworth Bayswater owned the British brand that was being phased out. PACCAR killed Foden itself to clear the way for Kenworth. ERF, Sandbach, acquired by Western Star, then MAN. Gone by the early 2000s Bedford, GM's British truck brand. Receivership 1992. Gone by the mid-1990s. 9 British truck brands extinguished in Australia between 1982 and 2006. Bayswater took their customers. Read that again. The pattern is the same as Ford Louisville. The corporate parent in another country made a decision. The Australian operation died. Kenworth was the American-owned alternative that adapted to Australian conditions. Cummins engines, road train compatibility, the W900 SR. The British brands offered Leyland engines tuned for English motorways and Gardner engines that could not handle the road train weights. The grades that John Holmstrom watched in 1961 killed them all. Chapter 8. The American Body, White Motor Corporation. 1980. The 4th of September 1980. Cleveland, Ohio. White Motor Corporation files for Chapter 11. Bankruptcy protection. Approximately $1 billion United States dollars in debt. At the time, the largest such corporate filing in United States history. White Motor had been founded in 1900 in Cleveland by Thomas H. White, the sewing machine industrialist, whose family also founded the White sewing machine empire. By 1950, White Motor was one of the 4 dominant American heavy truck builders alongside Mack, Peterbilt and Kenworth. By 1980, it was bankrupt. The named villain, Seaman E. Bunky Knudsen, former president of Ford Motor Company, recruited as White's COO in 1971 to save the company. The GM Pontiac executive, who built the Pontiac GTO. Henry Ford II's hand-picked Ford president, fired by Henry Ford II in 1969 after 19 months. White recruited him as a turnaround specialist. Knudsen failed. Across 9 years, White's debt tripled. The dealer network collapsed. August 1981, AB Volvo of Sweden buys the White truck plants for approximately $75 million United States dollars. The deal includes Volvo's right to use the White brand in North America. In 1985, White Motor Corporation ceases to exist as a legal entity. Volvo phases the White brand out over the next decade. The Australian consequence is severe. White Motor Australia is dissolved. Distributor networks collapse across every state. Western Star, once a White subsidiary, passes through Volvo to Freightliner to Daimler. Diamond Rio collapses with the parent in 1980. Studebaker had already collapsed in 1967. 6 American heavy truck nameplates extinct in Australia by the year 2000. One American truck survivor remains alongside Kenworth. Mack Trucks. Originally Allentown, Pennsylvania. Founded 1900 by the Mack brothers. Acquired by AB Volvo in 2000. Mack Australia survives, operating at Wacol, Brisbane since 1972. Mack Assembly there since 2002. Approximately 800 staff. Approximately 3,500 Volvo plus Mack trucks per year. The 80,000th Wacol truck, a Mack Titan, delivered to MLG in Western Australia in 2024, the same year Kenworth Bayswater delivered its 80,000th ether. Locally built truck. 2 factories, same milestone number, same year. Mack is the only American truck nameplate that still manufactures locally in Australia in 2026 alongside Kenworth. Every other American brand is foreign import only. 2 factories survive, Bayswater and Wacol. The trucks that adapted survived. Chapter 9. The Last Body. International ACCO. Dandenong, 30 June 2022. The 30th of June 2022. Dandenong South, Victoria. After 70 years of continuous Australian heavy truck manufacturing, since International Harvester opened the Dandenong plant in 1952, the last International ACCO rolls off the production line. The International Harvester ACCO had been built at Dandenong since 1962, the same year Ed Cameron's first 7 Kenworths arrived in Sydney Harbour. For 60 years, the ACCO and the Kenworth competed on Australian roads. The ACCO was the workhorse of local distribution trucking. The Kenworth was the workhorse of long-haul road trains. For 60 years, both were Australian-built. After the 30th of June 2022, only the Kenworth was. Dandenong produced more than 230,000 trucks across 7 decades, nearly 3 times Bayswater's lifetime output. The largest Australian truck plant by lifetime volume is the one that closed. The truth about Dandenong's death is older than 2022. Genuine Australian ACCO manufacturing died quietly in 2018 when the assembly line switched to imported Stralis chassis components from Italy. The Made in Australia badge survived 4 more years. The Australian content did not. The 30th of June 2022 was not the killing. It was the funeral. The named villain, Michael May, Mercedes-Benz trained, arrived at Iveco Australia and New Zealand as Managing Director in February 2020. Closed the Dandenong factory in June 2022. Promoted to Turin in December 2023, replaced by Glenn Dyer, ex-Daimler. The Mercedes to Iveco career path, twice in succession. May's verbatim cover stories at the closure announcement. A natural progression of Iveco's Australia-New Zealand transformation. It's a turning point. The actual decision logic, in May's own words, we could have continued and had to invest tens of millions in that facility or choose to align with Europe and get access to the latest product and technology. The Mercedes-trained managing director publicly weighed tens of millions of factory investment against access to European product and chose European product. The Dandenong factory and 145 Australian jobs were on one side of the scale. Madrid was on the other. Ella Letiagina, Iveco Australia Head of Network, Product and Marketing, supplied the corporate comfort verbatim. We have focused first on our staff with the early notification so as to create a smooth transition as we develop CIC. Iveco called the closure Manufacturing Sundown. Iveco hosted a jobs fair for the 145 redundant workers. 14 employers attended. Iveco's verbatim statement, "This was an opportunity to link great jobs with great people." 14 employers for 145 killed jobs. The workforce was repackaged as great people on the day they lost their wages. Approximately 120 manufacturing workers plus 25 engineers lose their jobs. The Iveco heavy-duty range shifts to full importation from Madrid, Spain. Italian-designed, Spanish-built, Australian-bought. The ACCO badge survives. The factory does not. The financial autopsy is the most important detail. Iveco sold the 12.21 hectare Dandenong South site at $127. Princes Highway for more than $95 million to Aliro Group and ISPT through Colliers, confirmed by MHD Supply Chain on the 20th of December 2022. Iveco retained a 1.7 hectare parcel for its customisation and innovation centre. The land was worth more than the manufacturing operation. The closure was a property play, not an industrial decision. Bayswater recruited 120 new manufacturing workers in the same financial year, exactly the number Iveco made redundant. Net Australian truck manufacturing jobs gain, 0. Net Kenworth gain, 120. Net Iveco loss, 145. The factories were 25 kilometres apart. One closed, one expanded. Same year, same skills. If you watched our International ACCO film, you know Michael May closed Dandenong in June 2022 and was promoted to Turin in December 2023. The bonneted Kenworth across town that won every customer the ACCO lost was the W900 SAR, engineered for the conditions Iveco refused to engineer for. The last International ACCO came off the line in Dandenong on the 30th of June 2022. The 80,000th Kenworth came off the line in Bayswater on the 27th of October 2023. 16 months apart. 25 kilometres apart. One closed, one expanded. Read that again. Chapter 10. The Inversion. PACCAR stayed. GM left. The 10th of December 2013, Detroit, Michigan. General Motors announces it will cease all Australian manufacturing by 2017. The named villain in Detroit, Dan Ackerson, GM Chairman and CEO. The named villain in Australia, Mike Devereaux, GM Holden Chairman and Managing Director. The man who fronted the parliamentary inquiry in March 2013 and denied the closure was decided weeks before he confirmed it. Devereaux flew to Detroit, returned with the closure announcement, resigned from Holden in February 2014, the 20th of October 2017. The last Holden Commodore rolls off the Elizabeth plant in Adelaide. Approximately 2,900 jobs gone. 60 years of Australian Holden manufacturing ended by a Detroit board decision. The Elizabeth plant is demolished. The land is redeveloped. In the same era, PACCAR Seattle made the opposite call. 2020 to 2021, PACCAR spends approximately $40 to $50 million on Bayswater expansion. 120 new manufacturing jobs added. DIAF assembly line added to Bayswater. DIAF Australian production has more than doubled since 2018. PACCAR Innovation Centre opened on the Bayswater site. PACCAR's Bayswater Parts Distribution Centre extended from 2024 to 2025 to 15,700 square metres, a 50% expansion. Same era as Holden closing Elizabeth. Same country produced the parent companies. Opposite outcome. Damien Smethurst, current PACCAR Australia Managing Director, appointed on the 8th of May 2023, a 25-year PACCAR veteran who joined as a graduate engineer in January 1998, said it plainly to owner-driver. PACCAR's unwavering commitment and continued investment in Australian manufacturing and Australian engineering that supports thousands of jobs all over the country. The American parent's Australian Managing Director naming the policy that distinguishes PACCAR from every other American industrial parent that walked away. The wider American withdrawal pattern is undeniable. Ford USA exited Australian heavy trucks in 1996. Chrysler closed Tonsley Park in 1981. GM closed Holden Elizabeth in 2017. White Motor went bankrupt in 1980. Studebaker collapsed in 1967. 5 American corporate parents abandoned Australian manufacturing across 5 decades. PACCAR. Seattle did not. If you watched our Chrysler Tonsley film, you know the American parent that closed Adelaide in 1981. If you watched our Holden film, you know the American parent that closed Elizabeth in 2017. The American parent that stayed is at 64 Canterbury Road, Bayswater. Its name is PACCAR. The American parent that left took Holden with it. The American parent that stayed kept Kenworth. Chapter 11. What remains? Stand on Canterbury Road, Bayswater. In 2026, the plant still operates. 1,315 employees per the 2024 IBIS World filing. Approximately 3,000 trucks per year, 21 per day at peak. Kenworth and DAF combined. 60% local content from approximately 160 Australian suppliers, employing an estimated 10,000 people in the supply chain. PACCAR, Australia. 2024 revenue, $2.153 billion. 2025 revenue, $2.2 billion. Heavy-duty market leader since 2001. 2025 result, 3,347 Kenworths delivered, 23.4% market share, up from 22% in 2024. Second place, Volvo on 2,326 sales. Bayswater outsold every imported European, Japanese and American brand. The dealer-customer dynasty is named. Brown and Hurley, founders in 1946 by 2 Army discharge veterans, Alan Brown and Jack Hurley, who pulled their demobilisation pay after the Second World War to start a truck business. Brown and Hurley signed with PACCAR in 1964, 8 years before the Bayswater plant opened. 75 years later, Brown and Hurley took delivery of the 70,000th Kenworth at the 2021 50th anniversary celebration. Jim Hurley, the elder statesman of Brown and Hurley, was an honoured guest. The same wartime spine that built Bertha built Brown and Hurley. Manny Melkonian, the Kenworth sales legend, honoured at the 50th anniversary in 2021, retired after a PACCAR Australia career spanning more than 50 years. Melkonian was selling Kenworths before the Bayswater plant existed. From the Cameron Blomfield import era through the W900 SAR launch to the T610 launch, one man saw every chapter. The hero artefacts in the National Road Transport Hall of Fame, Alice Springs. The Grey Ghost, chassis number 400,008, restored for $125,000. Bertha, Kurt Johansson's World War II surplus Diamond T road train, 20 metres apart. Slim Dusty's Lights on the Hill, written by Joy McKean, won the inaugural Golden Guitar at the First Country Music Awards of Australia in Tamworth, January 1973. Slim recorded more than 80 trucking songs across his career. The Dynasty: Harry W. Kent, Edgar K. Worthington, Captain Frederick S. Keane, Paul Pigott, John Holmstrom, Ed Cameron, George Blomfield, Damien Smethurst, Phil Webb, Manny Melkonian, Terry Baker, Alan Brown, Jack Hurley. Names that built Kenworth, Australia from a Seattle foreclosure in 1917 to a Hume Highway drive in 1961 to the heavy-duty market leader in 2026. Lesson 1. PACCAR stayed, Detroit walked away. GM closed Holden Elizabeth on the 20th of October 2017. Approximately 2,900 jobs gone. Ford exited Australian heavy trucks in 1996. Ford Australia closed Geelong and Broadmeadows in 2016. Chrysler closed Tonsley Park in 1981. White Motor went bankrupt in 1980. Studebaker collapsed in 1967. The same country produced the parents that left and the parent that stayed. PACCAR built Bayswater, Ford built and walked, GM built and walked. The W900 Sayre was tuned for the Hume Highway grades. The Holden Commodore was tuned for the global GM platform. One survived, one did not. PACCAR did not have to stay. PACCAR chose to stay. Lesson 2. Madrid killed Dandenong. Bayswater killed the Madrid trucks. Iveco closed Dandenong on the 30th of June 2022. Michael May said the company could have continued and had to invest tens of millions in that facility or align with Europe. He chose Europe. The trucks now ship from Madrid. The Madrid trucks killed Dandenong. Then Bayswater killed the Madrid trucks in the market. Iveco's 2025 Australian heavy-duty share collapsed to a fraction of Kenworth's 23.4%. Kenworth now sells one of every 4 heavy trucks delivered in this country. The factory that closed lost the war it had already lost. The factory that adapted won. Lesson 3. 5 parents walked away. 1 stayed. The difference was the W900 SR. Ford USA killed the Louisville in Dearborn in 1996. Cleveland, White Motor gone in 1980. Lancashire, Leyland Australia gone in 1982. Turin shifted to Madrid. International ACCO gone in 2022. Detroit closed Holden Elizabeth in 2017. Detroit closed Tonsley Chrysler in 1981. 5 foreign parents walked away from Australian manufacturing across 5 decades. 1 stayed. PACCAR Seattle, the Pacific car foundry that cast the Sherman tanks. The difference was not money. It was not market size. It was engineering autonomy. The W900 Sayre was Australian engineered. The Louisville was Dearborn engineered. The ACCO was Turin engineered. The trucks engineered for Australia survived. The trucks engineered for somewhere else died. The 30th of June 2022. Dandenong, Victoria. Michael May presided over the last International ACCO and explained the closure as a turning point. The 27th of October 2023. Bayswater, Victoria. Damien Smethurst presided over the 800,000th Kenworth and named PACCAR's unwavering commitment. 16 months apart, 25 kilometres apart. PACCAR Inc. 2024 revenue $33.66 billion US dollars. CEO Preston Fight. Net income $4.2 billion US dollars, the second highest in company history. Kenworth's American heavy-duty truck retail market share, 30.7% in 2024, up from 29.5% in 2023. Number 1 in America. Number 1 in Australia. Same parent, same Seattle foundry that cast the Sherman tanks, Same trucks that adapted. 5 competitors are dead. Ford Louisville, White Motor, Leyland Australia, the British Brigade, International ACCO, 5 corporate parents that walked away, 1 Melbourne plant still building, the Melbourne Rebel humiliated Detroit, the Melbourne Rebel humiliated Dearborn, the Melbourne Rebel humiliated Cleveland, the Melbourne Rebel humiliated Lancashire, the Melbourne Rebel humiliated Turin. The trucks that adapted survived. The trucks that did not died. The catalogue is open.